My name is Lydia Evans. I'm 32 years old and grew up in an upper-class family in the suburbs of Greenwich, Connecticut. To outsiders, my family was the perfect image. A 3-story white brick mansion, wrought iron gates, and cocktail parties packed with powerful people. But to my parents, I was nothing more than a failed product. My father, Charles Evans, was a senior investment advisor at a major hedge fund in New York. Over 30 years, he built a reputation, a network, and enough wealth to create an empire. He didn't believe in gentleness or encouragement. To him, children were investments meant to yield returns. My mother, Veronica, a Barnard alumna, gave up her writing career to become Mrs. Evans full-time, playing golf, hosting charity luncheons, and teaching me how to smile without creasing my face. My brother, Nathaniel, was the perfect replica of our father. He graduated top of his class at Princeton and is now executive vice president at the company my mother proudly describes as family-controlled. At 36, he's married to a state senator's daughter and has 2 sons enrolled in a private school that costs $40,000 a year. My sister, Bianca, 28, a former beauty queen from Brown, is interning at a nonprofit founded by her boyfriend, though everyone knows she lives off the family trust. And me, the middle child. I've always been the question mark. While Nathaniel loved finance and Bianca immersed herself in fashion and indie film premieres, I was fascinated by data and algorithms. At 12, I built my first game in Python on my mother's old laptop. When other girls wore prom dresses, I went to a tech summer camp at MIT. But none of that earned a flicker of interest at home. My father once said upon seeing me up at 2 a.m. coding, "That kind of stuff is for boys who aren't strong enough for sports." My mother gently set her teacup down and sighed. "Sitting at a screen all day will ruin your posture. Who's going to marry a girl with glasses glued to a monitor?" I remember my high school graduation clearly. I had the highest math score in the state. Instead of attending, my parents flew to Palm Beach for a fundraiser. Nathaniel was honored at a New York gala for writing an article on real estate trends. Me, I got a partial scholarship to Caltech, to which my mother reacted, "Engineering? What kind of husband does a girl in engineering expect to find?" They wanted me to study economics at Wharton, then get an MBA at Yale, and marry someone appropriate, meaning wealthy, Ivy League educated, and preferably allergic to keyboards. I said no. I chose computer science, and I paid for that choice with every look of disappointment etched on their faces. I tried to prove myself once. I sent copies of my research papers. No one opened the emails. I invited them to my thesis defense. My mother said it clashed with her spa trip to Napa. Nathaniel laughed and said, "Still finding your path. Hope you don't lose the map." I stopped sharing anything about my work. They assumed I was doing some low-level tech support job, maybe collecting data for a bargain bin phone app. I let them believe it. I even let my father think I was renting a studio in Brooklyn, when in truth, I had bought a small penthouse in Chelsea using money from my first round of funding. I no longer seek their approval, but deep down, I still wonder, will there ever be a day they stop seeing me as the embarrassment of the Evans name? I don't know. But one thing I do know for certain, I've stepped out of my family's shadow. I applied to MIT when I was 17, after firmly rejecting my parents' pressured suggestion to attend Wharton. The day I received my acceptance letter, I remember screaming in my room, hugging the thick cream envelope, only to hear my mother calling from downstairs. "What's all that noise, Lydia? Your sister's practicing her dance routine." I quietly folded the letter and slipped it into my drawer. There was no celebration, no congratulations. When my mother learned the news, she merely sighed. MIT? Full of engineers and thick glasses boys glued to computers. Not a single proper social hall. My father scoffed, folded up his Wall Street Journal without looking at me. MIT is fine for circuit board designers, not for Evans' daughters. I nodded, didn't argue. I was used to it. That fall, I moved into McCormick Hall, a red brick dorm across from the Charles River. My room had a window facing Longfellow Bridge. Every night I sat alone, watching the city lights shimmer, listening to the soft clang of the red line, whispering to myself, "You deserve to be here." I studied full-time, TA'd for Intro to Python, and took a side job entering data at a biomedical lab just to afford food, textbooks, and a birthday bouquet for Aunt Claire, the only relative who still remembered the day I was born. In sophomore year, I discovered my true passion, artificial intelligence in healthcare. I brought it up at Christmas dinner. My mother, scooping chicken onto her plate, responded casually, "Healthcare? Are you planning to be a nurse or a family doctor?" "No, I want to build AI systems that help doctors diagnose faster, reduce errors in internal workflows." My father smirked. "Where'd you read that nonsense? You should learn how to read a balance sheet before talking about hospitals." I didn't respond. By then, I'd already completed 3 advanced probability courses and was developing an early prototype for a tool to detect lung cancer more effectively. But to them, I was still just the girl with computers and pipe dreams. I graduated with a perfect GPA, was invited to stay on as a research fellow. They didn't come to my commencement. My mother said Bianca had a Lincoln Center performance. Nathaniel sent a 4-word text, "Heard you graduated, congrats." After graduation, I joined a small healthcare startup in Cambridge, starting salary $64,000 a year. I paid my own rent, food, and insurance. My father found out and called just to say, "That's what 4 years of tech school got you? A death job worth a used Toyota?" That line haunted me for months, especially on nights I stayed up rewriting user documentation, fixing a server that refused to run clean. He never believed in my path, but he also never asked what I actually wanted. What he didn't know was that while they were throwing parties in Martha's Vineyard, I was sitting on the floor of my 1-bedroom apartment with a leaky AC unit, sketching the first system map for a platform to connect rural patients with medical specialists. I called the project Lifeline. No logo, no investors. But it was the first thing I built not to prove anything to anyone, but because I believed it was necessary. 3 months later, I withdrew my entire savings, nearly $47,000, and wrote the first lines of code. I didn't tell anyone. I still drove my old Civic to Bianca's wedding, wore a clearance Macy's dress, smiled politely, and absorbed the condescending glances from relatives. "Lydia looks fine, doesn't she? A tech auntie at a fairy tale wedding. Still finding her path, huh?" I didn't push back. I simply smiled and sipped cheap champagne, the same kind I wouldn't buy for my own project to save budget. At that very moment, they didn't know I was preparing to pitch to the board of a major Boston hospital to pilot Lifeline for thyroid cancer patients. I named the platform Pulse Link, a simple name, but one that carried a heartbeat. Just like me at the time, quiet but alive. With the little money left after taxes and rent for my apartment in Somerville, I hired a part-time software engineer, a freshly graduated UI designer, and rented a small room in a building that used to be a medical supply warehouse. Our desks were cheap composite wood, the air conditioner roared like thunder, and I only allowed myself to eat sushi once a week, if I could find a discount coupon on the app. We started coding line by line as winter settled over Massachusetts. Without the budget for a professional UX test kit, I borrowed friends to volunteer. Some nights, the whole team worked under dim LED lights, typing away while sipping watered-down coffee. I once scrubbed the shared toilet myself because we couldn't afford cleaning services, but I'd never felt more alive. 3 months later, we had our first prototype, a system connecting patients with chronic illnesses to specialists, automatically sorting appointments based on urgency, geography, and insurance status. It functioned decently, but to survive, I needed funding. I prepared slides, a demo, and started knocking on investors' doors. The first meeting took place in a glass-walled office in Back Bay. I still remember the fund manager, a man in his 50s, peering at me over his gold-rimmed glasses and asking, "Don't you have a male co-founder? Health tech startups usually need someone with practical experience. I replied, "You mean a man?" He chuckled lightly, not denying it. I walked out of that building with my wrists stinging from melting snow, but my heart didn't break, just a little numb. I kept going. Pitch number 2, number 3, then number 19. One person said I should join another startup to gain more experience. Another suggested I become CTO and let someone else be CEO. I didn't say no directly, I just didn't accept a step back. The turning point came during a small demo session at a medical conference in Providence. I didn't have a big booth, just a self-printed poster and our team's shared laptop. While I was explaining the symptom analysis algorithm to a group of med students, I noticed a woman standing silently in the back. She waited until the crowd dispersed and then stepped forward. "Did you write this?" I nodded. "I'm Grace Keller. I used to be the CEO of a private hospital chain. Now I invest in independent healthcare initiatives." I handed her my business card. A week later, we met again at a small cafe near Tufts University. I laid everything out: the model, the data, operating costs, ROI projections, and even uncalculated risks. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask about my gender or academic background. She simply asked, "If I invest, what's the first thing you'll do?" "Hire a HIPAA compliance expert," I answered immediately. "I want to make sure this platform meets all medical data privacy regulations before scaling up." Grace refilled her tea and smiled. "I'll put in $150,000. Are you ready for pressure? I've knocked on 36 doors and got rejected 36 times. I think I've grown enough skin." From that moment on, PulseLink had a real heartbeat. I hired 2 more developers, a clinical coordinator, and moved our office to the 3rd floor of a repurposed industrial building near MIT. It had sunlight, an elevator, and a whiteboard big enough to map out our year-end strategy. Grace never micromanaged, but always showed up at the right time. When I was nearly out of cash because a major hospital delayed their contract. When our system had an emergency routing bug and the tech team panicked over desynchronized data. When I was about to sleep on the office floor for 3 nights straight. She only said, "Starting a health tech company isn't about proving yourself. It's about fixing something that's been broken for far too long." I nodded. By then, I was starting to understand that what I was building wasn't just a platform. It was an extended lifeline for patients forgotten in an overwhelmed medical system. But around that same time, my mother called. For the first time in nearly a year. She didn't ask how I was doing. She simply said, "We're throwing your father's 60th birthday party. Don't be late, and wear something decent. Not that eccentric stuff like last time." I glanced at my open MacBook, where the hospital network map was waiting for a new contract update. When St. Matthew Hospital in Philadelphia officially signed a pilot contract with PulseLink, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I wasn't happy, but because I'd grown used to keeping joy to myself. But that night, when the system recorded its first successful match between a Parkinson's patient and a neurologist 300 miles away, just 32 minutes after submission, I cried at my desk. No noise, no theatrics, just tears dripping onto the keyboard as I typed the next line of code. The 6-week pilot data stunned even St. Matthew's medical team. Wait time for specialist appointments dropped by 61%. Missed appointments were cut in half. Patient satisfaction scores exceeded the state average. News traveled fast. 1 month later, we received collaboration invitations from 2 more hospitals in Texas and Oregon. When the system reached 50,000 successful matches, I knew it was time for the next step. Grace Keller, my first angel investor, summoned me to her private office, a small oak-floored room atop a historic financial building in downtown Boston. On the table was a stack of documents. "Lydia, it's time for a Series A round." I looked at the number, $6.2 million. Enough to hire a research team, expand the tech department, and upgrade security infrastructure to meet federal standards. But with that came transparency reports, growth targets, media attention. "Are you sure?" she asked. If I weren't sure, I wouldn't be here. The next 3 months were a sprint. I pitched to nearly 30 investment funds, presenting growth charts, market expansion plans, and strategies to integrate Medicare Advantage. 7 backed out, citing a need for more time to monitor. 12 requested I step down as CEO in favor of someone with more tenure, but 8 stayed silent. Then all sent offers in week 4. We closed Series A with Riverside Ventures and Marlowe Capital, total raised $7.5 million. I signed the deal the same day my mother threw a 60th birthday party for my father. I still showed up. I wore a plain black suit and pinned a small silver brooch. Not to stand out, but to mark the last time I entered the Evans estate as someone they once underestimated. The party was the same as always: crowded, French wine, white orchids, and hollow conversations about stocks, Nantucket property, and Bianca's relationship with a young oil tycoon. When I walked in, no one turned. Nathaniel glanced over his shoulder, then went back to chatting. My father patted me lightly on the shoulder, like testing the weight of my coat. My mother said, "Finally." Careful not to step on the new cashmere rug. I said nothing. I just looked at her and gently replied, "I signed a $7 million investment deal for my company this afternoon. My shoes may be worth less than the rug, but I think the value I carry is enough to walk wherever I choose." She froze. Nathaniel furrowed his brow, but no one said a word. I returned to the office at 11 p.m. The lights were still on. The dev team was running stress tests on the upcoming update. I bought pizza, made coffee, and joined them. We worked until 3 a.m. 2 months later, we moved to a new office in Kendall Square. 4 floors, glass walls, whiteboard-covered walls, an automatic espresso machine, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself a private office with a door. That was when TechBridge put us on their front page with the headline, "Human-centered tech PulseLink is changing how America accesses healthcare." I was invited to speak at the National Conference of the Private Hospital Association. Harvard Business Review requested an interview. Forbes added me to its 30 under 30 list in health tech, but I declined most public appearances. I knew the work wasn't done. The media buzz could come, but the product had to actually work, and it had to save real lives. That spring, we began preparing for our IPO filing. Deloitte stepped in to audit. I hired a financial advisor, a securities attorney, and drafted a 3-year projection plan. One Friday, while meeting with lawyers from Morgan and Travis, Grace slid an email across the table. "Goldman Sachs wants to lead the IPO. Their initial valuation, $104 million. I leaned back in my chair, still clutching my lukewarm tea. The feeling wasn't excitement. It was, I really made it here. And for a split second, I thought of that old apartment, the jammed printer, and that first winter night at MIT when I swore to myself, one day, they won't be able to ignore me. Autumn dinners at the Evans estate always carried the scent of roast meat, mint-scented candles, and an invisible pressure. This time was no different. I arrived right on time, just as the invitation stated, yet still earned a quiet look of reproach from my mother for not arriving early to help set the wine glasses. Bianca descended the staircase in a sapphire silk dress, a pearl bracelet from our grandmother on her wrist. Nathaniel stood by the fireplace, whiskey in hand, chatting with Uncle Gordon, the family's longtime lawyer, about a new plot of land in Vermont that Dad might transfer to him for the organic farm investment. I wore a tailored black jumpsuit, nothing flashy, hair in a low bun, minimal makeup. No one asked how I was doing. No one asked about PulseLink. They simply assumed I was still doing some tech thing, as if that were a polite way of saying probably sorting boxes in a back room somewhere. When everyone sat at the long walnut dining table, my father raised his glass. "Before the main course, your mother and I want to share a few important updates about the family's assets." I paused mid-salad. The room fell silent. As you know, our family values discipline, reputation, and financial responsibility. These are not only foundational values, but also the criteria by which trust is earned. Nathaniel gave a smug smile. Bianca tilted her head as if waiting to be praised for the shine in her hair. My father turned to my brother. Nathaniel, having successfully managed the family's investment fund for the past 3 years, will continue overseeing the primary portfolio. Additionally, we've decided to officially transfer ownership of the lakeside house in Vermont to you to develop the eco project you've envisioned. Glasses clinked. A few "that's wonderful" remarks echoed. I stayed silent. My mother chimed in. "And Bianca, when you and Jack get married this December, we'll gift you the little house in Beacon Hill as a wedding present. You deserve a beautiful place to begin this next chapter." I set my fork down and looked up, not out of envy, but because I knew what was coming. My father turned to me. His expression changed. No warmth, no smile, just the cold, judgmental stare I'd known since middle school. "Lydia, as for you, your mother and I have thought this through. It's time you take full responsibility for your choices. Starting this year, you'll no longer receive financial support from the family." I took a deep breath. I hadn't accepted a single dollar from them since college, but hearing them publicly cut me off, as if pronouncing a sentence, still hit hard. "And of course the larger inheritances will go to those who stay aligned with family values," my mother added, her tone unchanging. Nathaniel nodded slightly. Bianca placed a hand on mine, briefly, performatively, then pulled it back before her manicure could be disturbed. I scanned the room, each oil painting on the wall, each gaze void of doubt that I could ever be more than the rebellious middle child. Expensive perfume lingered in the air. Candle flames flickered softly. Cutlery tapped against china like a rhythm section to a dishonest tune. "Just so I understand," I said, voice steady. "You're cutting me off from money I haven't touched in over 10 years? No response. "And the reason? Because I didn't follow the life you scripted for me? Because I didn't marry someone on the Forbes list?" My father shrugged. "It's simple. The family needs to invest in those who show real potential to grow in the right direction, not chase dreamy tech projects without a foundation." I laughed, a dry, sharp laugh that rang through the chandelier-lit room. "Fair enough," I said, standing up. "But if you think I need your inheritance to survive, you might want to catch up on the latest issue of TechBridge, or Forbes, or last week's Wall Street Journal." Bianca blinked. Nathaniel frowned. My parents looked at each other. I knew they didn't know. They'd never asked. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. Caller ID, Ava, CFO Pulse Link. I answered, standing right there. "Ava?" Her voice rang loud and clear, enough for the entire table to hear. "Lydia, latest update from the IPO advisory team. Goldman just finalized the pre-IPO valuation. The number is $104 million. Also, CNBC wants to interview you Monday morning." Silence. Absolute. I looked around. Their faces were pale as the tablecloth. No one lifted a glass. No one smiled. No one dared call me the rebellious one anymore. I ended the call, slipped the phone back into my bag, and looked up at my father. "Quite the decision, Mr. Evans. But don't worry, I'll manage all my own expenses." I turned and walked out before the main course was even served, and they stayed behind, still chewing on the belief that I would never amount to anything. I hadn't even made it out of the dining room when my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with the caller ID, Ethan Softbank. I glanced around. My father was frowning, gripping his wine glass tightly. My mother looked at me with a mix of doubt and worry. Nathaniel seemed to recognize the name. His face went pale instantly. I picked up, speaking clearly. "Ethan, I'm in the middle of a family meeting. What's going on?" His voice was excited, barely containing his joy. "Lydia, we just wrapped up the meeting with the advisory team. The board has approved the strategic funding round. SoftBank is investing $40 million into PulseLink, and based on the new valuation, your company is now at $102 million. Congratulations." The whole table went dead silent. I took another step toward the door, but paused, keeping the phone to my ear so no one in the room would miss a single word. Ethan continued. We'll send over the official term sheet tomorrow morning. Oh, and CNBC wants you on air Monday morning. They reached out already. SoftBank's also agreed to go public with the news this afternoon. Do you want me to schedule a press conference? Have them send the proposed schedule first. I'll confirm by tonight. And Ethan? Yes. Thank you for believing in my vision when no one else did. I ended the call. No one said a word. No more clinking silverware, no more clinking glasses, just the suffocating silence of a family that had just lost their right to define the worth of the daughter they once deemed the outsider. I walked back to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Looked my father straight in the eye. So, we were discussing financial cutoffs, weren't we? He didn't respond. But his eyes shifted from contempt to caution. It was the look I had waited my whole life to see. Nathaniel broke the silence. SoftBank, wait, is that a real investment? Of course, I smiled, and not the first, just the largest so far. Bianca slowly pushed her glass aside. She looked like she'd just swallowed something not meant for her. My mother, ever the social tactician, quickly adjusted her tone. Lydia, this is truly something to be proud of. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I looked at her, voice calm. Because every time I tried, you cut me off with stories about Bianca's wedding dress or Dad's new low-carb diet. That was just a misunderstanding, sweetie. She rushed to recover. No. It was a choice. You all chose not to ask, not to care, and not to believe. My father leaned back in his chair, for the first time losing that superior posture. PulseLink really hit a valuation over $100 million? I nodded, and still growing. SoftBank will help us enter the Asian market by Q3 next year. Goldman Sachs is still leading our IPO. Ooh, you might know my lead contact, Marcus Lanning. Your former partner, right? My father gripped the armrest tighter. There were no words left to deny it. I exhaled. So now, the daughter who went off course is the one leading American health tech into a new chapter. Lydia? Nathaniel spoke up, hesitantly. If there's a chance to collaborate between PulseLink and the family fund, then... I raised a hand, cutting him off. PulseLink doesn't accept family money. We have a policy. We only partner with those who believed from the start, not after seeing the numbers. Bianca forced a polite smile. Maybe I could talk to Jack? He's really interested in health platforms for his upcoming campaign. Maybe PulseLink? Bianca, I interrupted. My appearance at a political event isn't free anymore. Starting rate is $60,000, not including strategy consulting fees. My mother's jaw dropped. She had never heard me speak like that. Direct. Unapologetic. I stood. Looked around the room that once made me feel small. Now it looked smaller than ever. You all once said I didn't align with family values. I agree. But it seems now this family really wants to align itself with my value. No one argued. I grabbed my bag and turned to leave, but before I crossed the door, I looked back. You don't have to worry about the inheritance, because now I'm the inheritance. And I walked out of that house like a stranger stepping out of an old chapter to begin the one where I hold the pen. 2 days after that fateful evening, I received a bouquet so large the receptionist at PulseLink had to wheel it in on a cart. Attached was a small card, written in my mother's familiar handwriting. We're truly proud of you. Please give the family a chance to be part of your success. Love, Mom and Dad. I left the flowers untouched in the conference room all day. The next day, Nathaniel emailed from his company address. Are you free for lunch? I have some ideas for a collaboration between PulseLink and our investment fund. We could create a family round, beneficial for both sides. Less than 2 hours later, Bianca posted an Instagram story, a collage of me at the tech summit, with the caption, "So proud of my brilliant sister, future of healthcare is female." She even added a gold heart sticker. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I had once longed for those messages. Back when I was coding alone in a freezing apartment, eating cup noodles, counting every dollar to pay my designer. And they stayed silent. Now that the lights were on, suddenly they wanted to step onto the stage. Monday morning, I arrived at the office by 7 a.m. The SoftBank press conference happened as scheduled. CNBC aired it live. Hundreds of emails poured in from investment firms, healthcare institutions, and even universities inviting me to speak. By 11 a.m., my assistant came in with an update. Your father is downstairs. He says he doesn't have an appointment but would like a few minutes. I looked up, frowning. Alone? No. He's with Mr. Gordon, the family attorney, and it seems they've brought a draft contract. I gave a faint smile. They didn't waste time. I let them wait 15 minutes before inviting them to the third-floor lounge. That floor had no PulseLink logo, just a simple waiting area with gray upholstered chairs and a glass tea table. I wanted them to feel uneasy. My father shook my hand, his expression softer than it had been that night. Mr. Gordon set down his briefcase, but said nothing. Lydia, I want to start over, he said, trying to sound sincere. I tilted my head. What exactly does over mean? Starting from when you cut me off without asking how I was surviving, or from the moment you realized I was no longer a liability? He looked a bit thrown. I won't deny I was too harsh in the past, but now our family needs to stand together. PulseLink is the future, and if your mother and I could invest, or even just contribute experience, then I raised a hand, cutting him off. You're not the right fit for the future of this company. You all chose to stay outside the circle, and now there are no empty seats left. But you're my daughter, he raised his voice, then quickly lowered it when he realized he was losing control. We're family, Lydia. I stood, slowly, looking him in the eyes. Family's not a backstage pass you use when the stock price rises. You're not stakeholders of PulseLink, and no one in this family is allowed to call my company ours. I walked to the door and opened it. I think we should end this conversation here. Next time if you want a meeting, send a request through legal. PulseLink has protocols now. My father stood, eyes burning, but said nothing. He understood. This was no longer the Lydia who once waited for his approval after every straight-A report card. After they left, I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. A new message from Bianca popped up. Jack, just nominated you for the Influential Women in Innovation Award. I know I was wrong, but if there's any chance, would you let me try again? I shut the screen. That night, I sat alone on my apartment balcony. Boston sparkled beneath me. The phone kept buzzing with invitations, but I didn't take any of them. I poured a glass of wine, not to celebrate, but to mark something simple. I had lived too long waiting for them to change. Now, I choose to change their place in my life. The boundary has been drawn, and I have no intention of erasing it. PulseLink's IPO took place on a cloudless April morning. On Nasdaq's giant screen in Times Square, my company's logo appeared. A white background with a blue heartbeat symbol rising as if in motion. Below the building, my team stood in matching polo shirts, holding signs high, smiling brightly in the crisp early spring air. I didn't make a long speech during the ceremony. I said just one sentence. This isn't just a financial event. Today is a statement that women in tech don't need to be accepted. They just need to be heard. By the end of the day, PulseLink was valued at over $220 million. I retained 47% ownership. I didn't share that with my family. There was no celebratory dinner at the Evans estate. I celebrated with the founding team at a small riverside spot where we once sat with nothing. We ordered the usual, beef tacos, cold beer, and chili salted fries. No laptops, just laughter. The following week, I launched the Horizon Fund, a support fund for initiatives led by young women, focusing on healthcare technology and applied artificial intelligence. I used $12 million from my personal stake to seed it. The fund operated independently, with no shared office with PulseLink. I invited Dr. Renee Caldwell, a seasoned expert from Johns Hopkins, to be the executive director. We began by awarding scholarships to 15 high school girls from low-income areas in New Hampshire, helping them attend a tech summer camp at MIT. Every thank you letter I received was printed, framed, and hung in the fund's meeting room. Around that time, my mother sent an email. Your father really wants to see you. Just one lunch, not about investments or assets. He's truly proud. I thought about it, then agreed, but not at the classic restaurant where he used to host banking partners. I chose a small cafe in South End, one that served roast beef sandwiches with passion fruit sauce and didn't require a suit to be served. He arrived 12 minutes late, still in his familiar gray suit, but for the first time without a tie. He looked at me over his coffee. I was wrong. I nodded. I know. You're okay hearing that? I smiled. I'm okay because I don't need to hear it anymore. I've come far enough that I no longer need approval from my parents. He fell quiet, didn't argue. Finally, he placed a small box on the table. It's your grandfather's watch. I think you should have it. I didn't touch it, but I didn't reject it either. After that day, I didn't see him again for 6 months. But he started sending books on the history of medical tech, Japan's healthcare systems, and pioneering women in the field. No notes attached. I read every one. Each week, I still went to the PulseLink office, but I no longer worked late into the night. I started running in the mornings, learning piano, and occasionally attending conferences without speaking. I sat and listened to other founders, many of them a decade younger than me, but carrying dreams just as bold. I kept my distance from the family. Not a cutoff, but not close either. I didn't attend Bianca's second wedding celebration, but I sent a bouquet of white orchids. I didn't take Nathaniel's calls, but I did respond to his text when he said his wife gave birth to their first daughter. I congratulated him and said nothing more. I saw my mother again at a charity fundraiser sponsored by PulseLink. She wore a lavender dress carefully made up, standing beside political wives as if she never called me a girl who needed to adjust her ambition. But when she saw me enter, she stepped away from that circle and walked over. Did you have a few minutes? I nodded. We stepped out to the balcony, the breeze gentle. She looked at me for the first time not as an image-managing mother, but as someone learning how to begin again. I don't fully understand what you do, but I know I was wrong for a very long time. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that once held the orange juice she gave me every morning, the ones that trembled when I was scolded for standing incorrectly. Now they held a company, and myself. I forgive you, but I won't return to being the old daughter. I'll keep living, on my terms. She nodded. Maybe for the first time she truly understood what that meant. That night, I returned to my glass apartment by the docks, opened the windows, and sat in my leather chair reading the latest report from Horizon Fund. An email popped up from a 17-year-old girl in Maine. I want to be like you, not because you're successful, but because you walked alone and came back so others wouldn't have to. I read it again and again, and I thought, there's no greater recognition than that. Not from family, but from someone who once stood exactly where I stood on the very path I built myself. Lydia's story is proof that true success doesn't come from family approval or social validation, but from the unwavering courage to follow your own path. In real life, countless young women have been underestimated for choosing non-traditional careers. Yet they are the ones creating lasting value, not just for themselves, but for their communities. Lydia didn't just build a company, she redefined what it means to hold value, set boundaries, and live life on her own terms. What do you think about Lydia's choices? Would you have done the same if you were in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.